The very first thing that I want to talk about is under client management and attendance management. We've done a lot of work around shifts this release, and in particular with schedules. So we've added some new functionality in the Manage Shift screen here. So if you notice right away that we have these colors that we can apply directly to shifts now. So this is applicable if, let's say, I want my nursing shifts to be colored orange and I want my custodial shifts to be green. I can have my administrators be red. So whatever I want to do, I can colorize the shifts to have a visual indicator of what they really are on the scheduler and also on the time card screen. So in order to change things, I can just edit a current shift that's in place right now, and by default we're keeping the colors that are there currently as the system's default. So if you wanted to leave it as is, that's fine. If you want to colorize it, you can just by clicking the shade color, which is the background color. That's going to be for the shift. So if I want to change this one to kind of this purplish color, I can. I can even put in the hexadecimal code if I know the actual color code. Or I can use the gradient chart to pick exactly what color I'm looking for. So some different methods there. You can pick your text color as well. So if I want to change that text color to white, I can do that, and it gives you a sample down here of what that is going to look like. Another thing that we've added on this screen here before I move off and show you how the colors look on the scheduler and the time card itself, one thing that we've done is also we forced some validation on the attendance rule. So right here, one thing that we've noticed and working with cases coming and escalating up to us in development was there were a lot of people that weren't configuring their shifts correctly, and that in particular, they weren't applying attendance rules to shifts. Attendance rules should always be assigned to a shift except for when they're configuring an open shift. So multi-level shifts, a single shift level should always have an attendance rule. And the importance of that is so that any work time could be, that the employee has will be successfully merged or successfully matched with the scheduled time that they were supposed to work. And that way the alerts that you've configured in the attendance rule can trigger appropriately. So we forced this validation now that the attendance rule is a required field if it is not an open shift. So if I mark this as is an open shift, if I check mark this, this no longer becomes a required. In fact, it becomes grayed out, indicating that I cannot put a attendance rule onto that open shift. Okay, so that's another thing that we did there. So let's look how the shifts look with colors onto the scheduler itself. If I move to the employee scheduling under employee management, this is the default location. Some partners may have different areas where they've put the scheduler, but the default is employee management, employee scheduling, and scheduler. And this is kind of what it would look like. So we see the shifts being colored to whatever scheme that we would like to portray. Okay. The next thing that we want to talk about is the default schedule. You probably noticed as soon as I went into the schedule here, I have another menu item here called default schedule. So this is really important. Let's say I have an employee that always works shift A Monday through Friday. Well, I don't want to have to go in every single week to find his schedule. And that's exactly what you had to do prior to this release, was you had to go in every single week. You either had to come into the scheduler and copy schedules forward, or you had to use the import tool to import the shift assignments to the employees. Well, this release, we're introducing the default schedule, so no more forcing you to go into the schedule each week and update your employee schedules. So how does the default schedule work? First, we go to the client management, and you'll see this new menu item here under the attendance management called schedule rules. We're following the same pattern that we are throughout iSolved time, creating these rule sets to apply to employees. So if I go into the schedule rules here, you'll see a familiar layout. If I want to create a new schedule rule for employees, I simply just click on New Rule Set, and I can call this one maybe default. Okay. Add a new rule. I can call it weekly, shift A, or whatever I want to do. Now you'll notice under the rule type I have two different options. I have a pattern rule and a weekly rule. So the weekly rule allows us to configure a shift for Sunday through Saturday. So if my employee always works the same shift every single day of the week, I can define it that way. If they have a rotating pattern to what their schedule is, let's say their pattern repeats itself after 3 weeks or 21 days. So maybe they have 2 days on, 1 day off, 2 days on, 1 day off, and it just keeps following that pattern for 3 weeks, and their shifts vary. As long as there's a pattern to it, we can define what that shift is and schedule is going to be. Once the pattern has ended, it will just keep repeating itself. So let's go into a weekly rule here so you can see what that looks like first. You'll notice that we just have a simple grid, and then we just define the days of the week with the shift. You'll notice that no shift is an option, and that is the default there. So if I want to define a shift for each day, I just choose which shift that's going to be. And then we can see the times being applied to Monday through Friday there. Okay. Now you'll notice I only have a selection for one shift per day. That doesn't mean we can't assign more than one shift per day. That just means for this particular rule, we can only assign one shift per day. I can stack as many rules as I want, and just like any other rule set, it's based upon the order of precedence. So if I have one rule and I applied Monday through Friday, shift A, and then I just create a second rule, Monday through Friday for shift B. As long as those two shifts do not overlap each other, then both shifts can be applied to the same employee. If they do overlap, then it just takes the precedence order into consideration. So the first shift would be assigned because that's the one that hit the employee first. The pattern rule is similar, except instead of seeing the Sunday through Saturday rules, we will see a grid based upon the days in the pattern that we define here. So if I choose 21 days, for instance, in this pattern, I can hit next, and I get a grid for the 21 days. And again, just define which shifts are going to be applied each of those days within the pattern. Now, once we've defined our pattern or our schedule for the week, we do have conditions that we can apply too. So there are a couple conditions that we've given you in this situation here. So the first one is days and date range, and the second is employee matches labor field. The first one, days and date range, allows us to define specific days, again, within a date range. So let's say, for instance, I set in a precedence order my first rule saying this shift, shift A, is always going to be in effect only in December. So let's say typically my employee works an 8-hour shift, but come December, then they're going to be working 9 hours. December is a busy month for me, so I'm going to just give my employees some overtime so they can work 9 hours a day. So in this case, I can actually define a shift first saying based upon my start date and end date, they're going to be qualified for this shift. Anything outside of this date range is going to fall to whatever rule I have in place following this. So again, based upon the precedence orders. The other conditions we have is the employee matches labor field. So again, this is just filtering our employees out. So only employees that match this specific labor field would be applied to this shift. So you can have multiple employee types using the same schedule rule, but you can qualify them for the schedule rule based upon their home labor value. So if I come in here to the department and say this schedule is only going to be applicable to my admin employees, I can do that. Again, their home labor value. Okay? So once we've defined our schedule rule, we can then go into our employee management and employee scheduling. We have this default schedule here now. To apply the schedule rule to the employee, you simply just click on Add New and then just define the schedule rule with an effective date. Now keep in mind the effective date if you're using a pattern rule, is going to basically, in effect, be the day one of your pattern. So if I have a pattern rule of 3 weeks, well, 8/28 is going to be my day one in that 3-week rotation. If I want to preview what that employee schedule is going to be based upon their effective date, I can click on preview here by hitting edit and click on preview. It will give me just an attendance report for that employee for the current period. So if I have my effective date last year even, it would just show me what my current data is going to look like. It's not going to generate all data from their effective date forward. It will just show current data. So one other thing that we've done here is we've applied this default schedule into the schedule import too. So you don't have to go into every single employee to assign them the schedule rule with their effective dates. Under the schedule import, and this was here before, this was only used for the time card schedule, so this is used to bring in imports based upon the employee name, the date, and the shift that they were on. But now we can have employee default schedules too, so you can assign their default schedules through here as well. So I just choose this. The master import records available in the release notes has been updated with this information as well. So if you want to know what those import fields are, the most applicable ones are going to be the key or the employee name or number. And then you got the effective date and the schedule rule being applied. So those are the 3 main fields that you're going to be concerned about. So you can import the default schedule assignment through this functionality here. Okay, so how does that look like on the scheduler? We kind of got a glimpse of it before, so let's go back into the scheduler here. You'll notice that we actually have these shifts with parentheses surrounding it. Just like on the iSolved, on the time side, on the time card itself, if you have system-generated times coming from an auto mill or break, those are kind of indicated with parentheses surrounding them. Same concept here. We're considering the default shift as system-generated. It was based upon a rule, and so we're surrounding the shift name by parentheses. So that's how we can tell the difference between what was system-generated or a default shift versus a manually entered or imported shift assignment. So there's our parentheses for this day. If you notice down here on this 6 to 1500, this one does not have parentheses. This was manually entered. Okay. I had a question, how will this affect rounding to shift schedules? Rounding will be applied just the same as it was before to a manual shift. So rounding will still work as was designed. All right, so that's the most of what we've done on the default schedules there. So fairly simple to set up and to apply to your employees, but I think this will go a long way in helping to get people that never really need to go in and schedule every single day of the week to be able to just set it once and forget about it. Another thing that we've added on the scheduler itself is this grand total line down here. So before we had just this total line that would indicate basically the total for the page that you're currently on. Well, if you had multiple pages of employees, if you hadn't filtered out your employees up from above and you have multiple pages, then this total here just was indicating the totals for the page. Now we can actually see the grand total for all pages as well. So if I wanted to see a summary there, we could do that. Will the designated shade show on the time card as the colors? Well, yep, so let me go over to the time card so we can show you that as well. And you can see the custom color of the shift applied on this particular employee as well. Okay. Let's see, when will the ESS punch page be coming out? Well, we have an ESS punch page. I'm assuming you're talking about more than one employee punching from the same page at the same time. We are working on something similar to that. So That's still yet to be announced or with a delivery date, but that is something that we are actively pursuing. But if you're referring to just the individual punch page, we already have that for one employee. Okay. Let's go back to the scheduler here real quick. Another thing we've added to the filters, not only on the scheduler itself, but also on the dashboard tools, is this EE group. The EE group is our way for managers and supervisors to create their own groups. This was mostly used for allowing managers and supervisors to do mass punching for their employees. So using the mobile app or through the software, they could actually create a punch for their employees based upon the group that they've selected. So we've carried that functionality over to the scheduler and also onto the dashboard tools to allow the ESS managers or supervisors to filter their employees based upon the groups that they've created.